Once there were 3 young trees, growing on a hilltop, dreaming of what they could become one day. And the first tree said, "Someday I wish to be made into a box.
But not just any box.
I wish to be the treasure chest of a wealthy man. I will have ornate carvings on my sides, and my hinges and clasps will be silver, and I will hold within myself gold and rubies, diamonds and pearls, the most precious treasure in the world."
The second tree said, "Someday I want to be part of a boat. But not just any boat. I want to be the mast of a great sailing ship in the Royal Navy. I will stand, planted on the deck. The mainsail will pull against me, and together we will draw the ship through the waves so smoothly. The king himself will be able to sleep on board, even in the darkest storm."
The third tree said, "Someday I wish to remain a tree. But not just any tree. I want to grow so straight and so tall that I will tower above the clouds. And all who pass this hill will see me standing here, pointing the way to heaven."
Years passed.
Seasons came and went.
Then one day 3 woodsmen came up the hill carrying axes.
They cut down the first tree.
They cut down the second tree.
They cut down the third tree.
And the first tree was carried to a carpenter's shop, where it was stripped of its bark, trimmed of its branches, and was made into a box. But not the treasure chest of a wealthy man. It was made into a feed box for animals and placed in a barn.
The second tree was carried to a dockyard. There it too was stripped of its bark, trimmed of its branches, and was made into part of a boat. But not the mast of a great sailing ship. It was carved into a wooden bench and nailed in the back of a fishing vessel.
And the third tree, when it was stripped of its bark and trimmed of its branches, proved to be too flawed even for common usage, and it was covered with a tarp and laid aside in a lumber yard. More years passed. Seasons came and went.
And then one day, into the barn where the first tree lay, now a feed box for animals,
there came a young woman.
And a young man.
And that night the woman had her firstborn child, and she wrapped him in warm cloths and laid him in the box. And the dream of the first tree came true, for that night she held a treasure more precious than any in the world.
More years passed. Then one day into the boat where the second tree was now a wooden bench, there stepped a young teacher. The boat was sailed to the middle of a lake. There the young man fell asleep on the bench with his head on a cushion. A terrible storm arose. Waves crashed over the side of the boat. The fishermen on board, in fear for their lives, awoke the man, who stood and with one word silenced the wind and calmed the waves. And the dream of the second tree came true. For that day he had carried the King of all kings.
And what of the third tree? Well, one day soldiers came and found that tree and laid it across the back of a wounded man who struggled to the top of a tall hill where the tree was planted once again.
And the dream of the third tree came true.
For it towered above all else.
And all who passed the hill that day,
And who have passed it since can see
that it points the way to heaven.